My name is Amada Montgomery, and at 29 years old, I never expected to hear from my father again. 3 years of complete silence had taught me to stop hoping. Then, last Tuesday, an envelope appeared with his familiar handwriting. My heart nearly burst with joy. When I called my billionaire grandfather William to share the news, his response chilled me. He demanded to see it immediately. As I slid the letter across his mahogany desk, he frowned. "Look closer," he said. What I discovered next changed everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever received unexpected news that changed your life. I built a good life for myself in Boston. Working as a journalist for one of the major newspapers fulfilled my lifelong dream of uncovering truth and telling important stories. My downtown apartment might have been small, but it had character and a view of the city I loved. I earned respect in my field, particularly for my coverage of financial crimes and corporate fraud. The irony that my career path was inspired by my own family drama wasn't lost on me. My grandfather, William Montgomery, raised me since I was 12. A self-made billionaire, with investments spanning real estate, technology, and manufacturing, he had the resources to give me everything, but tried his best not to spoil me. He insisted I work summer jobs as a teenager, apply for scholarships, and make my own way as much as possible. Money is a tool, Amada, not a substitute for character, he would remind me often. While Grandpa William was a constant in my life, my father Jackson was anything but. Dad struggled with alcohol for as long as I could remember, which contributed to my parents' divorce when I was 8. Mom passed away from cancer when I was 12, leaving me in my grandfather's care. Dad would float in and out of my life during those years, sometimes disappearing for months before showing up with grand promises and ambitious plans. The relationship between my father and grandfather was always tense. Dad resented Grandpa's wealth and success, claiming it cast a shadow he could never escape. His business ventures repeatedly failed, often because he'd abandoned them midway for some new guaranteed opportunity. Grandpa would offer advice, Dad would ignore it, then inevitably ask for money when things fell apart. I built everything from nothing, Grandpa would say. Jackson simply refuses to put in the work. The final blow came 3 years ago at my 26th birthday dinner. Dad arrived late, slightly drunk, and immediately picked a fight with Grandpa. "You think your money makes you God?" Dad shouted across the table of the private dining room. "You use it to control everyone around you, especially my daughter." "I've done nothing but try to help you," Grandpa responded, his voice measured but cold. "And I've been there for Amada when you couldn't be bothered." "I'm her father," Dad slammed his fist on the table. "But you've turned her against me with your mansions and connections and opportunities. How am I supposed to compete with that?" I tried to intervene, begging them both to stop. "This is my birthday," I pleaded. "Can we please just have one peaceful family dinner?" But Dad was beyond reasoning. He threw down his napkin and stood up. "I'm done," he declared. "Done with your judgment. Done with your condescension. Done with this whole toxic situation." He turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Amada, when you're ready to have a relationship with me that doesn't involve him controlling everything, you know how to reach me." And then he walked out. I ran after him into the parking lot, calling his name. He got into his car without looking back and drove away. That was the last time I saw my father. I tried calling him the next day, but his number was disconnected. I drove to his small apartment across town, but he had already cleared everything out. I sent emails, messages through mutual friends, even hired a service to find his new address, and sent physical letters there. Nothing but silence in return. The first year was the hardest. I cycled through grief, anger, and confusion. Had he really cut me off completely because of my relationship with my grandfather? How could he just disappear without even giving me a choice? I threw myself into work, earning my first major promotion by breaking a story about investment fraud. By the second year, I had developed a ritual of writing him letters I never sent. I kept them in a box under my bed, dozens of updates about my life, questions about his, and pleas to reconnect. Sometimes I'd dream he had returned only to wake up to his absence all over again. In the third year, I finally reached something like acceptance. Dad had made his choice, and I couldn't force him to be in my life. I focused on building stronger relationships with friends, advancing my career, and my weekly dinners with Grandpa William, who remained my rock despite his demanding business empire. Which brings me to that Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago, when everything changed. It started as an ordinary day. I woke up at 6, went for my usual run along the Charles River, showered, and made coffee. I was reviewing research for a story about corporate tax evasion when my doorbell rang. A delivery person handed me a small package. No return address, just my name and address written in a handwriting I would recognize anywhere. My father's. I stood frozen in my doorway, staring at the package in my hands. The delivery person had already disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone with this unexpected connection to my father. My hands trembled as I closed the door and carried the package to my kitchen counter. The brown paper wrapping was slightly wrinkled, as if it had been carried around for a while before being sent. My name and address were written in the same slanted script I remembered from birthday cards and notes in my lunchbox when I was a child. I ran my fingertip over the blue ink, feeling the slight indentation on the paper. For 3 minutes, I just stared at it, afraid that opening it might somehow break the fragile thread that had suddenly appeared between us. What could he possibly have to say? After 3 years of silence, was he sick? Moving even further away? Or was this finally the apology and reconnection I had dreamed about? I took a deep breath and carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a plain white envelope, a faded family photograph from a fishing trip when I was about 9 years old, and a small wooden carving of a bird in flight. The carving was beautiful, detailed work that I immediately recognized as my father's handiwork. He had always been skilled with a knife and a piece of wood, creating little treasures during his periods of sobriety. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded the single page inside. Dear Amada, I know it's been too long. Not a day has passed that I haven't thought of you. I've been working on myself and have made some important connections. There's a business opportunity that could change everything for us. I want to make things right. I'll be in touch again soon with more details. This time will be different, I promise. The bird represents freedom from the past. Keep it close. Love always, Dad. The letter was short, vague, and frustratingly light on details. What business opportunity? What connections? And why reach out now, after 3 years of ignoring my attempts to contact him? Yet despite my questions and the flutter of anger in my chest, I felt a surge of hope. He had thought about me every day. He wanted to make things right. I picked up the wooden carving, admiring how he had captured the sense of movement in the bird's wings. It felt significant somehow, like it contained a message beyond his written words. The photograph showed the 3 of us, me, Dad, and Grandpa William, standing on the edge of a lake holding up fish we had caught. I was grinning wildly in the picture sandwiched between the 2 men who had each shaped my life in profound ways. My weekly call with Grandpa was scheduled for that evening, but I couldn't wait. I dialed his number, and his assistant put me through immediately, a privilege I rarely used. Amada, is everything all right? Grandpa's voice was concerned. Our unscheduled calls usually meant some kind of problem. Grandpa, I got a letter from Dad. I blurted out emotion, making my voice crack. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. What did it say? He finally asked, his tone careful and measured. I read him the short message, word for word. I see, he said when I finished. And you're sure it's from your father? Of course I am. I know his handwriting, Grandpa. Another long pause. I think you should bring the letter here, right away if you can. Something in his voice made me uneasy. Is something wrong? I'd rather discuss it in person. Can you come now? I agreed and drove the 30 minutes to his estate in the wealthy suburb outside Boston. The security gate opened automatically as I approached, recognizing my car. I parked in front of the grand colonial home where I had spent my teenage years. Martha, the housekeeper, who had been with my grandfather for decades, greeted me with a warm hug. He's in his study, she said. He canceled his afternoon meetings after your call. That surprised me. Grandpa William rarely rescheduled business for personal matters. I found him standing by the window looking out at the manicured gardens. At 72, he still stood tall, and imposing his silver hair perfectly trimmed his casual attire, still managing to look sophisticated. He turned as I entered, and I saw concern etched in the lines around his eyes. Let me see it, he said, without preamble. I handed him the letter, the photo, and the wooden carving. He examined each item carefully, his expression growing more troubled by the second. What is it? I asked, anxiety building in my chest. You're scaring me, Grandpa. He picked up the letter again and handed it to me. Look closer, at the handwriting, Amata. Really look. I studied the familiar slant of the letters, the way the loops in the L's and E's curved. And then, with Grandpa's prompting, I began to notice subtle differences I had missed in my emotional state. The pressure on certain downstrokes was heavier than Dad's usual touch. The spacing between words was slightly wider, and the signature, while similar, lacked the distinctive hook on the final "un" of Jackson. I don't understand, I said, a cold feeling spreading through my stomach. I received a letter last week, Grandpa said quietly. Allegedly, from your father, asking for money for a business venture. You did? Why didn't you tell me? Because I wasn't sure it was genuine, and I didn't want to upset you unnecessarily. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out an envelope. Compare them. The second letter was similar in tone, but more specific about the alleged business opportunity, a real estate development that needed initial investment. It requested that Grandpa William transfer $200,000 to a specified account as a first step. Looking at the two letters side by side, the discrepancies in handwriting became even more obvious. They were good imitations, but definitely not my father's authentic handwriting. Someone is pretending to be Dad, I whispered, feeling sick. But who would do that? And why? That's what we need to find out, Grandpa said grimly. Someone is clearly trying to use your father's identity to scam money from us. The question is, where is your real father, and does he know about this? My mind raced with horrible possibilities. Was this just a cruel prank? Or was something more sinister going on? And if these letters weren't really from my father, then where was he? Was he safe? The 3 years of silence suddenly took on a much darker meaning. I thought he was just angry and stubborn, I said, my voice breaking. What if something happened to him? Grandpa put his hand on my shoulder. Let's not jump to conclusions. First, we need to verify your father's whereabouts and whether he knows about these letters. I nodded, trying to gather my thoughts. How do we do that? I know someone who can help us, Grandpa replied. A private investigator I've used for business matters. Very discreet, very thorough. I'll call him right now. As Grandpa made the call, I sat down heavily in one of his leather chairs, staring at the fake letter and the wooden bird carving. If this wasn't from my father who carved the bird, was it purchased somewhere? And the photograph? It was definitely genuine, a copy of one that had once hung in my father's apartment. Whoever was behind this knew details about our family. They had access to personal items, or at least images of them. This wasn't a random scam. This was targeted, personal, and suddenly very frightening. Thomas Keller arrived at the estate within an hour. The private investigator was not what I expected. Instead of the hard-boiled detective type from novels, he was a soft-spoken man in his 50s with kind eyes behind rimless glasses and a methodical way of speaking. He listened carefully as we explained the situation, taking detailed notes and examining both letters without touching them. First thing we need to do is verify Mr. Jackson Montgomery's current whereabouts, he said, looking up from his notebook. When was the last time you had confirmation of his location? I explained about his disappearance 3 years ago and my failed attempts to contact him. I did manage to find an address for him about 2 years ago, I added, in Durango, Colorado. I sent letters there but never got any response. Keller nodded. That gives us a starting point. I'll need a recent photograph and any information you have about his habits, friends, employment, history, anything that might help track his movements. Grandpa handed him a file that he had apparently prepared in advance. This contains Jackson's social security number, date of birth, last known addresses, and photos from the last time we saw him. I raised an eyebrow at my grandfather's efficiency, but I wasn't really surprised. Preparation was second nature to him. One more thing, Keller said. Is there any reason someone would specifically target your family for a scam, beyond the obvious financial motivation given Mr. Montgomery's wealth? Grandpa and I exchanged glances. I've made my share of business rivals over the decades, Grandpa admitted. And there have been threats before, though nothing recently. My job involves investigating financial crimes, I added. I've written exposés on several major corporations and individuals. It's possible this could be related to my work. Keller made notes of our suggestions. I'll look into all angles. For now, if any more communications arrive allegedly from Jackson, don't respond, but contact me immediately. The next 2 days crawled by. I tried to focus on my work, but found myself staring at my phone, jumping at every email notification. I kept the wooden bird on my desk, turning it over and over in my hands, searching for any clue it might contain. Keller called on the 3rd day. I've confirmed that the address in Durango was indeed where your father was living until recently, he reported. However, according to neighbors, he moved out approximately 3 weeks ago. Did they say where he went? I asked anxiously. No specific destination. But several neighbors mentioned he left with a business associate, an older man with glasses and a beard. They seemed to be in a hurry. Did this man have a name? The neighbors knew him only as Phil or Phillips. They said he had been visiting your father frequently in the weeks before they left. I relayed this information to Grandpa when we met for dinner that evening. Phillips? He repeated, frowning. That name doesn't ring any bells in connection to Jackson. Keller is checking if Dad left a forwarding address or if his mail is being held somewhere, I said, pushing my barely touched salmon around my plate. He's also looking into Dad's bank records and phone activity. Good, Grandpa nodded. We need to know if he's involved in this scheme or a victim of it. You think Dad might be behind the fake letters? I asked, hurt by the suggestion. Grandpa sighed. I don't want to believe it, Amada, but we can't ignore the possibility. Your father has asked for money under false pretenses before. Not like this, I insisted. He wouldn't forge letters and use old family photos to manipulate me. Before Grandpa could respond, my phone rang. It was Keller again. "I've found something interesting in your father's financial records," he said, without preamble. "For the past 2 years, his banking activity has been minimal and predictable. Small deposits from a carpentry business. He apparently started in Durango, regular withdrawals for rent and utilities. But beginning 6 weeks ago, there were several large deposits, followed by equally large withdrawals." "How large?" $50,000 in, $50,000 out within days. This pattern repeated 3 times. "That sounds like money laundering," I said, my journalist instincts kicking in. "It's consistent with that, yes. I'm still tracing where the money came from and where it went." After ending the call, I filled Grandpa in on this new development. "This is looking more and more like some kind of criminal activity," he said gravely. "Perhaps your father got involved with the wrong people." Later that night, back in my apartment, I received a call from a blocked number. When I answered, I heard breathing, but no one spoke. "Hello," I said repeatedly. "Who is this, Dad? Is that you?" After about 30 seconds, the caller hung up. I immediately called Keller and reported the incident. He promised to try tracking the number, though he wasn't optimistic about blocked calls. Unable to sleep, I took out the wooden bird carving again. As I turned it over in the lamplight, I noticed something I had missed before. On the underside of one wing, barely visible, were tiny marks that looked like they might be letters. I grabbed a magnifying glass from my desk and examined them more closely. They were indeed letters and numbers etched in minute detail, SP 34 newtons, 118 watts. I quickly researched what these might mean and realized they could be partial coordinates. The next morning, I showed my discovery to both Grandpa and Keller. "Good catch," Keller said, examining the carving. "These could be pointing to a specific location. I'll check what's at or near these coordinates." That afternoon, Keller called with another update. "I've identified the man your father was seen with. His full name is Sean Phillips, and he has quite a record. Multiple fraud convictions, including investment scams targeting the elderly. He was released from prison 8 months ago." My heart sank. This didn't sound good for my father. "Is he known for violent crimes?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Not directly, but he has associated with people who are. The concerning part is that one of his known tactics is to find vulnerable people with connections to wealth, befriend them, and use them to reach their wealthy contacts." "You think he's using my father to get to my grandfather?" I said, the pieces falling into place. "It's a strong possibility. The question is whether your father is a willing participant or being coerced." Grandpa was convinced it was the former, but I couldn't accept that. The father I knew had flaws, certainly, but would never participate in something like this. Despite all our problems, he wouldn't use me this way. "We need to consider that your father might be in danger," Keller said, during our next meeting at Grandpa's house. "If he initially agreed to participate in a scam, but then changed his mind, these people might be forcing his compliance." "Then we need to find him," I insisted. "Before something worse happens." Keller nodded. "I've traced the coordinates from the bird carving. They point to an area near Glenwood Springs, Colorado. There's not much there except an old mining site and some vacation cabins." "Could he be held there?" I asked. "Possibly. I'm working with a contact in Colorado to check it out discreetly. We don't want to alert anyone if your father is indeed being held against his will." As we were discussing next steps, Grandpa's security system alerted us to a delivery at the gate. Another package had arrived, addressed to Grandpa this time. Inside was another letter, supposedly from my father, now explicitly asking for $2 million for a guaranteed investment opportunity that would make up for all the lost time and rebuild our family. It instructed Grandpa to wire the money to an offshore account within 3 days. "This is getting serious," Grandpa said, his face grim. "I think we need to involve the police." Keller raised a cautionary hand. "Let me trace where this package came from first. If your son is being held somewhere, a police investigation might spook his captors." Using his contacts, Keller discovered the package had been sent from a shipping store in downtown Boston. Security footage from the store showed a young man in a baseball cap dropping off the package. He didn't match Sean Phillips' description. A hired courier, most likely, Keller surmised. But this tells us something important. Whoever is behind this is operating at least partly from Boston, not just Colorado. Later that day, Keller called with an unexpected breakthrough. "I found your father's laptop," he announced. It was in a storage unit attached to his former apartment in Durango. "The manager held it when your father left without giving proper notice." "What's on it?" I asked eagerly. "It's password protected, but my tech specialist is working on it. If we can access it, it might tell us what your father was involved in before he disappeared." The next morning, Keller arrived at my apartment with the laptop and his tech specialist, a young woman named Riley, who worked miracles with the computer. Within an hour, she had bypassed the password protection. What we discovered shocked all of us. My father had been compiling extensive research on a company called Next Gen Investments, documenting what appeared to be a sophisticated fraud operation. There were screenshots of transactions, recorded phone conversations, and a detailed timeline of activities. "This looks like he was building a case," I said, scrolling through the files. "Like an investigation." "Next Gen Investments," Grandpa muttered. "That's one of Arthur Blackwood's companies." "Arthur Blackwood?" Keller asked. "My chief business rival for the past 20 years, Grandpa explained. We've had numerous legal battles over property developments and technology patents. Further searching revealed emails between my father and an FBI agent named Diana Foster. In these exchanges, my father agreed to act as a confidential informant in an investigation into Next Gen Investments and Arthur Blackwood. The last email, dated just before my father disappeared from Durango, was particularly concerning. "Jackson, your information has been invaluable, but we have reason to believe your cover may be compromised. Discontinue all contact with target subjects immediately. Meet at designated location B tomorrow at 0900 for extraction. Foster." My God, I whispered. Dad was working undercover for the FBI. "And it looks like his cover was blown," Keller added grimly. "This changes everything." The revelation that my father had been working with the FBI stunned us all, especially my grandfather. For 3 years we had believed Dad had abandoned us out of anger and resentment, when in reality he may have been protecting us by keeping his distance. "We need to contact this FBI agent immediately," I insisted, pointing to Diana Foster's email address on the screen. Keller nodded. "I'll reach out through proper channels. If your father was indeed a confidential informant, they'll want to know about these fraudulent letters and the potential threat to him." While Keller worked his connections to reach Agent Foster, I dove deeper into my father's laptop. The more I discovered, the more amazed I became at the extent of his investigation. He had meticulously documented financial transactions, suggesting that Next Gen Investments was running a Ponzi scheme that had defrauded investors of millions. And there was more. Evidence linking Arthur Blackwood to offshore accounts, tax evasion, and even bribery of government officials. "Dad was thorough," I murmured partly to myself. "These are the kind of receipts journalists dream of finding." But the most shocking discovery came in a hidden folder labeled simply family. Inside were dozens of documents related to Grandpa William's business empire, focusing specifically on connections between his companies and Blackwood's interests. There were transaction records, meeting minutes, and copies of contracts going back 15 years. My heart raced as I opened a voice memo dated just before Dad's disappearance. His voice filled the room, sounding tired but determined. "Diana, I've confirmed the connection. The shell company that received the kickbacks from NextGen's municipal contracts traces back to William Montgomery Enterprises through 3 layers of subsidiaries. I don't believe William is directly involved. This has Blackwood's fingerprints all over it. He's been setting my father-in-law up for years, making it look like William is complicit in the fraud. I need to warn him, but I can't risk contact until we have everything secured. The evidence is in the encrypted files I sent yesterday. The password is Amada's birthday, month, day, year, no spaces." I sat back stunned. Dad hadn't just been investigating Blackwood. He'd discovered that Blackwood was trying to implicate my grandfather in his illegal activities. He'd been working to protect our family all along. I turned to face Grandpa, who had been listening to the recording over my shoulder. His face had gone pale. "William the First," said quietly, using his first name instead of Grandpa for perhaps the first time in my life. "Did you know about any of this?" He sank heavily into a chair. "I knew Blackwood was ruthless, but this? No. I had no idea he was trying to set me up." He looked up at me, his eyes troubled. "Jackson was trying to protect me, and I spent 3 years thinking the worst of him." Before we could process this further, Keller returned with news. "I've made contact with Agent Foster. She's on her way here now, along with her team. They've been looking for Jackson for weeks." Agent Foster arrived within the hour, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a brisk manner. She confirmed what we had pieced together: my father had become an FBI informant after accidentally discovering NextGen's fraud while doing carpentry work at their Colorado offices. When he realized the connection to Blackwood and the potential threat to Grandpa, he dove deeper, becoming a key asset in their investigation. "We had an extraction plan in place when he warned us that his cover was blown," Foster explained. "But he never made it to the meeting point. We've been searching for him since, fearing the worst." "And you never thought to contact his family?" I asked angrily. "We had no confirmation of foul play, and Jackson was explicit about keeping his family, especially you, out of it," she replied evenly. "He believed involving you would put you at risk. Based on these fraudulent letters, it seems he was right to be concerned." As Foster was explaining this, another package was delivered to my apartment. This one contained a USB drive and a note, $2 million. Instructions on the drive: 3 days or Jackson Montgomery dies. The FBI immediately took possession of the drive, analyzing it in their mobile tech unit. It contained a video that made my blood run cold. My father, looking thin and exhausted, reading a statement demanding Grandpa pay the money. Though he showed no visible injuries, the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. "They're holding him somewhere in Boston," Foster concluded after analyzing the video. "Background noise suggests an industrial area near water. We're working to identify the specific location." "What about the money Grandpa asked?" "I'll pay it immediately if it will bring him home safely." Foster shook her head. "We strongly advise against that. Once they have the money, they have no incentive to keep Jackson alive. We need to locate him first." "And if you can't," I challenged, "if 3 days pass and we've found nothing, then we'll discuss contingency plans," she said firmly. "But my team is good at what we do, and now that we know Blackwood is likely behind this, we have more angles to pursue." The FBI set up surveillance operations at both my apartment and Grandpa's estate, in case the kidnappers made contact again. Agents were also deployed to monitor Blackwood's known associates in the Boston area. That night, as I tried and failed to sleep, my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered immediately with an FBI agent listening in on another line. Amada Montgomery, a distorted voice, asked. Yes, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We know the FBI is involved now. That changes the terms. $5 million, not $2, and you'll make the delivery personally alone, or your father dies. I need proof he's still alive, I demanded. There was a pause, then my father's voice came on the line. Amada, don't do what they ask. It's a trap. Blackwood is trying to. His voice was cut off by what sounded like a slap. The distorted voice returned. Tomorrow noon. Instructions will follow. Come alone, or he dies. The call ended abruptly. The FBI agent immediately began tracing it while I sat shaking, my father's warning echoing in my ears. He mentioned Blackwood by name, I told Foster, when she arrived minutes later. They'll know he's exposed them. Which makes this more dangerous, she agreed. They have less reason to keep him alive now that he's identified his captor to you. So, what's the plan? I asked. I'm not just going to sit here and do nothing. Foster regarded me thoughtfully. We need to move faster than they expect. I think it's time to bring the fight to Blackwood directly. By dawn, the FBI had obtained warrants to search Blackwood's Boston offices and home. What they found at his waterfront mansion was damning, financial records confirming everything my father had uncovered, plus evidence linking him to Sean Phillips and the fraudulent letters. But there was no sign of my father. As noon approached, I received a text with an address in South Boston and instructions to bring proof of the wire transfer to an offshore account. It's an abandoned office building near the harbor, Foster said, showing me satellite images. We've already got a team in position. We'll wire the building for sound and video before you arrive and have agents stationed throughout the area. I thought you said we shouldn't pay the ransom, Grandpa objected. We're not, Foster explained. We're setting up a fake transfer confirmation that will pass initial scrutiny. It's about buying time while our other teams continue searching properties connected to Blackwood. As the FBI prepared the operation, Keller pulled me aside. While they focus on Blackwood, I've been looking at Phillips. He owns a storage facility across town under another name. It's not on the FBI's radar yet, but my sources suggest there's unusual activity there. You think that's where they might be holding my father? I asked. Keller nodded. It's worth checking out. I could go now while the FBI is focused on the meeting setup. I made a split-second decision. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not, he objected. It's too dangerous. My father risked everything to protect our family, I insisted. I'm not sitting on the sidelines now that he needs me. Besides, I'm a journalist. I know how to stay out of sight while gathering information. After some argument, Keller reluctantly agreed on the condition that we only conduct reconnaissance and call for backup at the first sign of my father or his captors. We slipped away while the FBI team was busy preparing for the noon meeting. The storage facility was in a rundown industrial park 30 minutes from downtown Boston. It looked abandoned at first glance with faded signs and unkempt grounds, but Keller pointed out the new security cameras discreetly placed around the perimeter. Someone's invested in security recently, he noted, as we parked a block away and approached on foot. And look, fresh tire tracks. We circulated around the building, staying out of camera view, until we found a service entrance with a keypad lock. Through a small window, I could see a corridor lit by fluorescent lights. This place isn't abandoned, I whispered. We need to get inside. Keller studied the keypad. I might be able to bypass this, but it will take time, and if there's an alarm. Before he could finish, the door opened and a man stepped out, lighting a cigarette. Keller pulled me behind a dumpster just in time. The man was talking on a phone. Yeah, Blackwood says we move him tonight after the girl delivers the money. Too many feds sniffing around. No, the offshore site. Yeah, I know it's a one-way trip for him, but that's not our problem. My blood ran cold. They were planning to kill my father after getting the money. When the man went back inside, Keller immediately called Agent Foster, updating her on what we'd discovered. She redirected a tactical team to our location while instructing us to stay hidden and not attempt entry. We watched from our hiding place as FBI vehicles converged silently on the facility 20 minutes later. The operation happened with military precision. Agents breached multiple entrances simultaneously, and within minutes, we heard the all-clear signal. Foster herself came to get us. We found him, she said, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. He's alive, but he needs medical attention. They brought my father out on a stretcher. He was pale and thin, with bruises on his face and a bandaged arm, but conscious. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. "Amada," he whispered as I rushed to his side. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted you involved in this." "It's okay, Dad," I choked out, holding his hand. "We know everything. You were protecting us." As the paramedics loaded him into an ambulance, he gripped my hand tightly. "William," he asked urgently, "is he safe?" "He's fine," I assured him. "He's with the FBI right now. We've been looking for you together." Relief washed over his face. Tell him Blackwood was setting him up for years. The evidence is all in my files. He needs to know it wasn't my imagination or jealousy. It was real. He already knows, Dad. We found your research. You did it. You protected the family. As the ambulance doors closed, Agent Foster approached me. "We've arrested 4 men here, including Sean Phillips, and Arthur Blackwood was taken into custody at his office 20 minutes ago. Your father's ordeal is over. And thanks to his work, we've uncovered one of the largest financial fraud schemes in the state's history." I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that Dad was safe, pride in what he had accomplished, and lingering anger over the 3 years of silence and pain. But mostly, I felt a profound sense that a new chapter was beginning for our family, one that would require healing and rebuilding, but held the promise of truth and reconciliation. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of hospital rooms, FBI debriefings, and news reports about Arthur Blackwood's arrest. Dad was being treated for malnutrition, dehydration, and a broken arm that had been poorly set during his captivity. The doctors assured us he would recover physically, but the emotional trauma would take longer to heal. I divided my time between the hospital and helping Agent Foster navigate the mountain of evidence my father had collected. As a journalist, I had a good eye for organizing information and identifying the most significant threads in a complex story. "Your father was meticulous," Foster commented, as we reviewed files together in a conference room at FBI headquarters. "He documented everything and created fail-safes to ensure the evidence would surface even if something happened to him." "That sounds like Dad," I said with a sad smile. "When he commits to something, he gives it everything." Foster gave me a thoughtful look. "You know, we offered him witness protection at the beginning of the investigation. He refused. Said he needed to stay connected to the real world to be effective. And to keep an eye on us from a distance, I realized. Even when we thought he had abandoned us, he was watching over us." While Dad recovered in the hospital, Grandpa and I had several intense conversations about what would happen next. The FBI had advised us that though Blackwood and his immediate accomplices were in custody, there might be associates still at large who could pose a threat. They want to put us in protective custody until the trial, Grandpa explained during one of our late-night coffees in the hospital waiting room. Move us to a safe location, provide security. I shook my head firmly. I'm not hiding. Dad spent 3 years sacrificing his relationship with us to build this case. If we run and hide now, what was it all for? It's not about hiding, Amada. It's about being sensible. No, it's about taking control of the situation, I insisted. These people operated by keeping us in the dark, manipulating us through fear and uncertainty. I'm done with that. I outlined my alternative plan. Instead of passive protection, we would set a trap for any remaining threats. Using my journalism contacts, I would plant a story about new evidence in the Blackwood case being held in a secure location. Then, with the FBI's help, we would monitor who came looking for it. It's too risky, Grandpa objected. Let the professionals handle this. The professionals have been working this case for 3 years and still didn't prevent Dad from being kidnapped, I pointed out. Besides, I'm not suggesting we do this alone. We'll work with Foster's team every step of the way. After much debate, and to my surprise, Foster actually supported my plan, with modifications. She recognized the value of proactive measures and appreciated that my media connections could create a convincing story that would flush out any remaining conspirators. But you will follow our protocols exactly, she insisted during our planning meeting. No improvising, no journalist heroics. I agreed, though. I crossed my fingers mentally about the no improvising part. My experience as an investigative reporter had taught me that some situations required quick thinking and adaptation. The story went live on a Tuesday morning. A carefully crafted piece by a colleague suggesting that Jackson Montgomery had secured insurance documents implicating additional high-level figures in Blackwood's scheme. The documents were allegedly held in an attorney's office pending Jackson's full recovery. By that afternoon, surveillance had identified 2 suspicious individuals conducting reconnaissance around the law office we had named in the story. One was a former NextGen executive who had not been implicated in the initial arrests. The other was a private security contractor with ties to Blackwood. They took the bait, Foster confirmed. Now we wait to see what move they make. We didn't have to wait long. That night, monitoring devices placed in the law office recorded an attempted break-in. FBI agents arrested both men we had identified, plus a third accomplice who had served as their driver. Under questioning, the former executive revealed that there was a contingency plan in case Blackwood was arrested. A second operation run by Blackwood's silent partner was prepared to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence, with my father at the top of the target list, followed by Grandpa and me. Who is this partner? Foster demanded during the interrogation, which I watched via closed-circuit television. The man shook his head. I don't know. Blackwood only ever referred to him as the investor. All I know is he has significant political connections and a lot to lose if the full extent of the scheme becomes public. This revelation added urgency to our situation. If a powerful unknown figure was orchestrating cleanup operations, none of us was safe yet. Dad was released from the hospital the next day, still weak but insistent on being part of the solution. He moved into Grandpa's estate where security had been significantly enhanced. Seeing the two of them together in the same room, awkwardly attempting to rebuild their relationship, while both worried about our safety, would have been almost comical under different circumstances. We need to draw out this investor, Dad said during a strategy session in Grandpa's study. He's the key to ending this for good. How do you propose we do that? Grandpa asked. Though still reserved with Dad, he had developed a new respect for his son's strategic thinking during this crisis. Dad turned to me. We use Amada's original plan, but bigger. Instead of hinting at evidence, we announce that I'm holding a press conference in 3 days to reveal everything, including the identity of Blackwood's silent partner. Foster, who had joined us for the meeting, looked skeptical. That puts an enormous target on your back. I've had one there for 3 years, Dad replied grimly. At least this time I'll be facing it with my family and the FBI, not alone in some cabin in Colorado. After hours of debate, we refined the plan into something both aggressive and defensible. Dad would indeed announce a press conference, but it would be held at a secure FBI facility with restricted access. In the meantime, I would use my media contacts to generate maximum publicity, hopefully pressuring the investor into making a move before the announcement. Grandpa, despite his initial reservations, proved invaluable in setting up the operation. His business connections and resources allowed us to create a convincing security perimeter while actually establishing multiple layers of surveillance. If someone wants to get to Jackson before the press conference, they'll have to go through these checkpoints, he explained, pointing to a map of the estate. Each one gives us another opportunity to identify them. For 2 days, we maintained the charade, with Dad giving brief statements to selected reporters about his intention to name names and expose the full network. I wrote an accompanying piece for my newspaper, carefully worded to imply that Dad had documented connections between Blackwood's operation and several prominent political figures. On the eve of the planned press conference, our operation paid off. Security cameras captured a black SUV approaching the service entrance of the estate. When guards attempted to stop it, the vehicle accelerated, crashing through the gate. 4 armed men emerged, heading toward the main house. The FBI tactical team hiding on the grounds immediately responded, capturing 2 of the intruders in the initial confrontation. The other 2 barricaded themselves in the greenhouse. "Surrender now," Foster called through a megaphone. "The building is surrounded." Instead of surrendering, one of the men called a number on his cell phone. Moments later, we intercepted a call to the greenhouse from a burner phone located in downtown Boston. "What's happening?" a voice demanded. "Is it done?" "We're pinned down," the intruder responded. "2 men down, FBI everywhere. We need extraction." "There is no extraction," the voice replied coldly. "Complete the job or don't bother coming back." That callous response seemed to break something in the trapped men. They surrendered 5 minutes later, agreeing to full cooperation in exchange for protection from the investor. The leader of the group, a former military contractor named Marcus Reed, provided the final piece of the puzzle. The investor was Gerald Winters, a state senator who had used his political influence to facilitate Blackwood's fraudulent investments and received millions in kickbacks. With this information, the FBI obtained warrants for Winters' arrest and the seizure of his financial records. By morning, the senator was in custody, and the press conference had transformed from a trap into an actual announcement of the successful conclusion of the case. Standing beside my father as he addressed the media, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Despite everything he had endured, he spoke with dignity and clarity, explaining his role in the investigation without seeking glory or placing blame. When asked about the 3 years he spent away from his family, he simply said, "I did what I thought was necessary to protect the people I love. The cost was high, but I would pay it again." Afterward, as we walked back to the car together, I slipped my hand into his, something I hadn't done since I was a little girl. "You did it, Dad," I said softly. "It's really over." He squeezed my hand, his eyes glistening. "Not over," he corrected gently. "Just beginning. The hard part comes next, rebuilding what was broken." Looking ahead, I saw Grandpa waiting for us beside the car, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. The road to healing our family would indeed be challenging, but for the first time in years I believed we would travel it together. The days following the arrest of Senator Winters and the dismantling of the entire fraud network should have been purely celebratory. The FBI praised Dad's courage and persistence, the media hailed him as a citizen hero, and Grandpa's business reputation was not only preserved but enhanced by his cooperation in the final sting operation. Yet inside our family, the atmosphere remained tense and awkward. 3 years of silence had created wounds that acknowledgement of good intentions couldn't immediately heal. Dad moved from the hospital into Grandpa's guest house rather than returning to my apartment as I had initially offered. The physical distance mirrored the emotional gap that still existed between us. Our first family dinner together was painfully stilted. We sat around Grandpa's formal dining table, 3 people, connected by blood and shared trauma, but struggling to find common conversational ground. The doctors say I should regain full use of my arm in a few months. Dad offered, breaking one of many uncomfortable silences. Grandpa nodded stiffly. I've arranged for the best physical therapist in Boston to work with you. Thank you, William. That's very generous. More silence, broken only by the sound of silverware against plates. How much do you remember? I finally asked. From your time in captivity. Dad's fork paused midway to his mouth. Most of it. They wanted information about what evidence I had gathered and who I had shared it with. When I wouldn't tell them, they tried. He trailed off, then continued more firmly. They tried various methods of persuasion. I reached across the table and touched his hand. I'm sorry you went through that alone. I wasn't alone. Not really, he replied, meeting my eyes. Thinking of you and even your stubborn grandfather here kept me going. I knew if I could just hold out long enough, the evidence would eventually come to light one way or another. You could have trusted us with the truth from the beginning, Grandpa said, his voice carrying a hint of the old resentment, instead of disappearing and letting us believe you had abandoned the family. Dad set down his fork. Could I have? Blackwood had infiltrated your company, William. He had people watching Amada. If I had stayed in contact, it would have led them straight to the evidence and put you both at risk. So you made that decision for all of us, Grandpa countered. Without discussion, without consent. Yes, I did, Dad acknowledged. And I would do it again to protect you both. I'm not asking for gratitude, but I had hoped for some understanding. The tension in the room became unbearable. I suggested we take dessert in the living room, hoping a change of setting might ease the strain, but it made little difference. By 9 o'clock, Dad excused himself, saying the doctors had advised him to rest frequently during his recovery. As he left, Grandpa and I exchanged glances. That went well, I said sarcastically. It will take time, Grandpa sighed. 3 years of believing one thing, only to discover the complete opposite was true. It's a significant adjustment. For all of us, I agreed. But we need to try harder. Dad nearly died protecting this family. Grandpa nodded reluctantly. I've arranged for Dr. Melissa Jang to meet with us tomorrow. She specializes in family trauma and reconciliation. Family therapy, I raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound like you. Yes, well, he cleared his throat. Uncomfortably, recent events have suggested that my usual approaches to family dynamics might benefit from professional guidance. I hid a smile at this grudging admission. For Grandpa William Montgomery to acknowledge he needed help with anything was unprecedented. Dr. Jong turned out to be exactly what our family needed. A calm, insightful woman in her 50s, she created a space where difficult truths could be spoken without judgment. In our first session, she asked each of us to express what we had felt during the 3 years of separation. I went first, describing my journey, from confusion to hurt to anger to resignation. Dad listened with tears in his eyes, nodding occasionally. I wrote you letters, I told him. Dozens of them. I kept them in a box under my bed. I wrote to you, too, he admitted quietly. Letters I could never send. They're in a notebook in Colorado. I asked Agent Foster to retrieve it for me. When it was Dad's turn to share, he spoke of the crushing isolation of his undercover life. The hardest part was the holidays, he said. Knowing you were together, probably thinking the worst of me. I nearly broke cover so many times just to let you know I hadn't abandoned you by choice. Grandpa went last, and his sharing surprised me the most. Beneath his stoic exterior, he had been deeply hurt by what he perceived as his son's rejection. I blamed myself, he confessed. I thought I had pushed you away with my controlling tendencies, my inability to show proper appreciation for who you are rather than who I wanted you to be. Dad looked stunned. I had no idea you felt that way. I always thought you were disappointed in me. I was frequently frustrated, Grandpa clarified, but never disappointed in who you are, Jackson, only in the choices you sometimes made. Like disappearing for 3 years, Dad asked with a hint of his old defiance. No, Grandpa surprised us by saying, that choice, now that I understand, it was perhaps the most selfless thing you've ever done. I'm still angry about how it was executed, but I cannot fault your motivation. That first session broke the ice, but the real work of reconciliation happened in the weeks that followed. Dad gradually revealed more details about his investigation, how he had accidentally discovered discrepancies in NextGen's accounts while installing cabinets in their office, how he had initially tried to report it through proper channels, but found himself blocked at every turn, and finally, how he had connected it all to Blackwood's vendetta against Grandpa. He was obsessed with destroying you, Dad explained during one of our now regular family dinners. It wasn't just business rivalry. He blamed you for his brother's suicide 20 years ago. Robert Blackwood, Grandpa, frowned. He was my partner in my first real estate venture. He embezzled funds and got caught. I had nothing to do with what happened afterward. In Arthur's mind, you drove his brother to it by exposing the embezzlement, Dad explained. The entire fraud scheme was partly about money, but mostly about revenge. He wanted to destroy your reputation and see you prosecuted, not just bankrupted. As Dad's physical strength returned, Grandpa surprised us both by offering him a position overseeing the Montgomery Family Foundation, the charitable arm of his business empire. You've proven you have integrity and investigative skills, Grandpa said gruffly. The foundation needs someone who can ensure donations go where they're supposed to and have real impact. Dad was hesitant at first. Working together hasn't exactly gone well for us in the past, William. True, Grandpa acknowledged. But perhaps we've both learned something from recent events. I know I have. Dad promised to consider it, which itself represented enormous progress in their relationship. Not every day brought healing. We still had arguments and misunderstandings. During our first attempt at celebrating Thanksgiving together, Dad and Grandpa fell into an old pattern of sniping at each other over dinner, culminating in Dad storming out before dessert was served. I found him sitting on a bench in Grandpa's garden, staring up at the stars. Some things never change, I said, sitting beside him. Some things shouldn't, he replied. Your grandfather is still the most stubborn man I've ever met. Wonder where I get it from? I nudged his shoulder gently. You're not exactly flexible yourself. Dad laughed softly. Fair point. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before I gathered courage to ask the question that had been bothering me. Dad, why didn't you find some way to let me know you were okay, even just a signal that you hadn't really abandoned us? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "That was my greatest mistake. I convinced myself that any contact was too risky, that the people watching me would use it to get to you. But looking back, I think part of me was afraid." Afraid of what? That you wouldn't believe me. That you'd choose your grandfather's interpretation over mine. Or worse, that you'd insist on helping and put yourself in danger. He turned to look at me directly. "I underestimated you, Amada. I saw you as my little girl who needed protection, not as the strong, capable woman you've become. I'm sorry for that." His words unlocked something in me, a tight knot of hurt I hadn't fully acknowledged. I began to cry, really cry for the first time since this whole ordeal began. "I missed you so much," I managed between sobs. "I thought I hadn't been enough for you to stay." Dad pulled me into a hug, his own tears falling into my hair. "You were everything, Amada. You were the reason I had to see this through, no matter the cost. I just didn't realize how high that cost would be for both of us." When we finally returned to the house, Grandpa was waiting in the kitchen, awkwardly putting together plates of pumpkin pie. "I thought we might start dessert over," he offered, perhaps with less discussion of politics this time. Dad smiled tentatively. "I'd like that, William." It was a small moment, but it felt like a turning point. Not a magical resolution to all our problems, but a genuine willingness to keep trying despite the difficulties, for our family. That was no small victory. 6 months passed, bringing us to today. The spring sunshine streams through the windows of Grandpa's estate as I sit in the garden reflecting on how dramatically our lives have changed since that letter arrived on my doorstep last fall. Dad has fully recovered physically, though he still sometimes wakes with nightmares that send him pacing through the guest house until dawn. He accepted Grandpa's offer to run the Montgomery Family Foundation, bringing a new level of transparency and purpose to its operations. Under his leadership, the foundation has launched initiatives supporting whistleblower protections and financial literacy education, causes deeply personal to him now. Our weekly family dinners have evolved from awkward obligations to genuinely pleasant gatherings. Last night, I actually heard Grandpa laugh at one of Dad's jokes, a sound so unexpected that both Dad and I nearly choked on our wine. My own career has flourished in unexpected ways. With Dad's permission, I wrote a series of articles about the Blackwood fraud case, changing names and certain details to protect the ongoing legal proceedings. The series won a prestigious journalism award and has led to job offers from national publications, though I've decided to stay in Boston for now. My family is here finally whole again, and I'm not ready to create another separation. The legal aftermath continues to unfold. Arthur Blackwood and Senator Winters are awaiting trial, along with a dozen associates. The evidence Dad gathered has proven invaluable to the prosecution, though he has mixed feelings about testifying. "I don't want to be defined by this case forever," he told me recently. "At some point, we all need to move forward." Moving forward has meant establishing new boundaries and communication patterns in our family. Dad and Grandpa still disagree frequently, but they've learned to express their differences without the old pattern of Dad exploding and Grandpa freezing him out. They've found common ground in their shared commitment to protecting our family and, surprisingly, in their business instincts. Despite their different approaches, they both have a keen eye for opportunity and impact. For Dad, making amends has been a daily practice rather than a single grand gesture. He shows up consistently, calls when he says he will, and makes himself available whenever I need him. The wooden bird carving that came with that first fake letter sits on my desk now, a reminder that messages and intentions can be falsified, but actions reveal truth over time. Grandpa, too, has changed. His brush with potential ruin and the revelation of his son's sacrifice have softened some of his harder edges. He's still demanding and occasionally imperious, But he's learning to express appreciation more freely and to acknowledge when others have valid perspectives different from his own. As for me, I've had to re-examine many of my assumptions about both men in my life. I had cast my grandfather as the controlling villain and my father as the victim in our family drama for so long that adjusting to a more nuanced reality has been challenging. Both men are flawed, both have made serious mistakes, and both have shown remarkable courage and love in their own ways. This afternoon, Dad is teaching me how to carve wood in the garden workshop. It's something he tried to interest me in when I was younger, but I never had the patience for it. Now, watching his hands skillfully shape the cedar block into a delicate form, I appreciate the meditative focus it requires. You have to feel the grain of the wood, he explains, guiding my hands. Work with it, not against it. Fighting the natural direction only leads to splits and breaks. I can't help but hear the metaphor in his words. Our family had spent years working against our natural grain, fighting the connections that bound us together, even when separated by silence and misunderstanding. I think I understand now why you find this so calming. I tell him carefully, shaving a thin curl of wood away from the emerging shape. It forces you to be present, to pay attention to what's actually there, instead of what you think should be there. Dad smiles. That's exactly it. Took me years to learn that lesson both in woodworking and in life. Later, as we show Grandpa our admittedly amateur creations over dinner, I realize how precious this ordinary moment is. 3 people who nearly lost each other forever, now sharing a meal and conversation without the weight of secrets between us. I've been thinking about what I've learned from all this, I say, as Martha serves dessert. About family, about judgment, about truth. And what conclusions have you reached? Grandpa asks, genuinely curious. That silence doesn't always mean absence. That protecting someone and controlling them can look similar from the outside. That we can be completely wrong about the motivations behind someone's actions. I take a breath. And most importantly, that family bonds can bend almost to breaking but still find a way to hold. Dad reaches across the table and takes my hand. Eloquently put. I'd add one more lesson, if I may. Please do, I encourage him. That sometimes the hardest person to forgive isn't the one who hurt you but yourself for the ways you may have contributed to the pain. Grandpa nods slowly. In my 73 years, I've never heard a truer statement. We sit together as the evening light fades, 3 people who have traveled a difficult road to find our way back to each other. The journey isn't over. Healing rarely follows a neat linear path, but we're moving in the right direction together. The wooden bird sits in the center of the table, a reminder of where this journey began. Dad has carved 2 more to match it, 3 birds in flight, a family finding its way forward on newly healed wings. Have you ever discovered that a situation you completely misunderstood actually had an explanation you never could have imagined? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this tale of family forgiveness and finding truth resonated with you, please like and subscribe to see more stories about rebuilding what once seemed broken beyond repair. Remember that sometimes the longest silences contain the most important words never spoken. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find healing in your own family relationships, whatever challenges they may face.